Crested Butte, Colorado. Late summer, 1885. Abigail Hawthorne stood on the steps leading down from the train. Competing odors immediately came over her. The fresh evergreen breeze from the Rocky Mountains fought with the mechanical odor of the train, and the two mingled with the smoky haze that emanated from the small town. It was home to only a few hundred people, but it supplied 1,000 or more miners in the county. She adjusted the bust on her dress and tucked the small pillow she was sitting on under her arm. Fortunately, her dress was not the full-bust Victorian style that were common in the East. Otherwise, the train ride would have been unbearable. Lowering her gaze, she saw her 3 traveling companions looking down at her. 2 of them looked very peculiar compared to the townspeople. The first was a short, thin, balding man, very well dressed and wearing glasses. Edmund Horace was a lawyer from Denver who had been her father's attorney for the past few years. What bothered Abby was that he rarely smiled, and when he did, goosebumps ran down her spine. They, and most men, were overshadowed by the man they called Swede. Jonas Swanson was a man-mountain. He was nearly 2 heads taller than Mr. Horace and 3 times as big in the chest. Abby wondered how he could find suspenders big enough to pull on all that muscle and keep the suspenders on. The third man she would have recognized in any crowd. Even though he was dressed the same as most people in town, Abby knew she would recognize his gait and manner of speaking anywhere. He was a handsome man with black curly hair and a black beard. His big blue eyes and outgoing personality made him stand out. Besides, he had been Abigail's husband, Thomas Hawthorne, for 5 years now. "Stay close," her husband warned as he helped her downstairs. "This is no place for a lady." "You should know," she thought, holding back the bitter comment. She knew it was in his blood. It had been his life for over a decade before he came home. She looked into his eyes and saw the excitement he tried to hide. A year ago, that look would have made her heart beat faster, but now it was a reminder that she'd given up on him. Like a moth to a flame or Icarus to the sun, she sighed softly. "Mrs. Hawthorne," Horace interjected, "please stay close to us. Unfortunately, in these parts, an attractive woman is rarer than the gold and silver these men seek." "Thank you, Mr. Horace. Both my husband and the Swede are packed in iron, and I know the Swede has a gun as well. I feel quite protected, but I will be careful and stay close." Horace nodded and turned to the Swede. "You take our things, and I'll go look for this Bachman and his transportation." The big man hummed and nodded. The Swede rarely spoke. Abby had always assumed it was because he didn't speak English well, however. He seemed to understand it perfectly. Abby looked at her husband and saw that his smile was partially hidden in his beard. His eyes were looking around the city as if he was searching for something. "Do you really miss it?" "What?" he replied, a look of surprise on his face. "You used to look at this place as if it were your long-lost sweetheart." "Well, that's a bit dramatic, but yes, I do miss this place from time to time." "So you're planning on leaving again?" she hissed. "Damn it, woman. Save your poison for someone else. Yes, I miss it, but I'm still here, aren't I? I'm still married to you and living on the ranch." "Look, Abby," he sighed. "I know this trip has you in over your head. I can't wait to meet him face to face either." Abby took a deep breath and calmed down. She knew her husband was right. She had been on edge for the past 4 months as everything seemed to be falling apart. Now she was about to face her ex-husband, and it promised to be a nightmare. "I'm so sorry, Thomas. You're right. This trip is frustrating. Things haven't been right since Sarah ran away last May. Now we have to face Jeremiah again, and it brings back a lot of bad memories. You know that meeting has to happen. As for Sarah, I already told you I didn't do what she says I did. She's still angry about her father, but I'm sorry she ran away." "I know," Abby replied. "She never forgave us for getting married. You were drinking heavily at the time." "Damn it, Abby. Not here and not now," he bellowed at her. Abby turned away and looked around the small mining town. She forced herself not to think about the last few months. She remembered better times. She had moved to the Colorado Territory with her father, Henry Thompson, when she was only 6 years old. They left Pennsylvania a few months after her mother died. It was 1860, just a few years before the Great War between the states began. They came to Colorado a few years after the Pikes Peak or Boost Gold Rush. Her father did not seek gold, but sought wealth of a different kind. He bought a ranch that was one of three that occupied a small valley on the southeast slope of Pikes Peak. This valley could become very valuable if a railroad were ever built through it. Their ranch adjoined two others located in the valley, Old Man Wilson's and Hawthorne's ranch. Old Man Wilson lived up to his name and seemed to be at odds with just about everyone. The Hawthornes were heaven sent. With so few other children in the neighborhood, she was lucky to have two children close in age as neighbors. Abigail immediately became friends with the two Hawthorne brothers, Thomas and Jeremiah. She was the same age as Jeremiah, and Thomas was a couple years older. All three grew up and became inseparable. Abby smiled as she remembered how they would play together for hours after they finished their chores. Even then, the brothers were polar opposites. When they played, Jeremiah was always the lawman and Thomas the outlaw. She, on the other hand, always played the role of the sufferer or princess. Funny how I was drawn to wanderers back then, she chided herself. I caught him, and he's a fool. I shouldn't be surprised if he's restless now. They had lived on the ranch only a few years when the war broke out. It didn't affect Colorado much, but it affected the Hawthornes. Mr. Hawthorne left his wife and two little boys and went to war when Thomas and Jeremiah were only 11 and 9 years old. He was gone for only 2 years, but when he returned, he was a changed man. Abby remembered him boisterous and full of laughter, but he came home mangled and broken. He lost his right arm and was partially blind in his right eye. He had also lost his spirit. Abby could count on the fingers of one hand the number of times she heard him laugh after he came home. Her father said he had died in the war, but his body just hadn't laid down yet. His condition was a heavy burden on the family. Mrs. Hawthorne cared for him, but everyone knew she wasn't very interested in the ranch, so Thomas and Jeremiah ran it under her father's care. Abigail's dream was to stay in the valley and start a family, and it seems that Jeremiah dreamed of that too. Thomas had other dreams, and ranch life didn't interest him. His temperament and desire for adventure matched the spirit of a vagabond. She loved both Thomas and Jeremiah then. Jeremiah was her castle, her knight in shining armor, and Thomas was her pirate who stole her heart. Like most dreams, reality shattered her when soon Thomas left to seek his fortune in search of gold and silver in the Rocky Mountains. It broke her heart, but made it easier to choose. Jeremiah was her future. She and Jeremiah married. The only unpleasant moment in those early years was after Sarah was born. The labor was difficult, but her daughter was born healthy. Unfortunately, after that, Abby was unable to carry another child for longer than a few months. Abby was heartbroken, but Jeremiah was a pillar of support for her. His love and attention covered her, and her love for him grew. But it wasn't strong enough, was it? She thought to herself. Henry Thompson, too, was busy at this time. A small village had sprung up at the mouth of the valley. It was not large, with only about 50 people living in it, but it had all that was needed for a town. It had a store, a church, a blacksmith store, and a boarding house with a tiny saloon attached to the back. Abby knew her father owned a stake in almost all of these establishments. No wonder the town was called Thompsonville. She and Jeremiah had been married just over 6 years when Mr. Hawthorne quietly passed away. Not surprisingly, Mrs. Hawthorne decided to go to San Francisco and settle with her sister. Jeremiah told Abby that his father had left the ranch to him and Thomas on the condition that they take care of their mother. A year later, in 1877, the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad and the Atchison, Topeka and Santa Fe Railroad engaged in a war over access rights. The most notable incident was a major confrontation when Bat Masterson and his Dodge City strongmen, hired by the AT and SF Railroad, took over a roundhouse in Pueblo. Eventually, a man from the D and RG Railroad bribed them to leave. During those few years, there were rumors of burned homesteads and people being driven off their land. Fear reigned in the valley. It was then that her father brought a Swede to the ranch. Despite the Swede's presence, the war on the railroad affected the valley. One night, the Wilson Ranch burned down. His grandson and his new wife had come to the ranch months earlier to help. Old Man Wilson died in the fire, and his grandson was badly burned. Not a week later, the grandson and his wife left, but not before selling the ranch to Henry Thompson. Her father said they did it because the grandson wouldn't be able to recover, and they wanted to keep him away from the railroad at least temporarily. Jeremiah always questioned the details of those events, and the relationship between her father and her husband soured dramatically. This greatly aggravated her marriage, and she felt like she was constantly defending her father to Jeremiah. As the railroad wars continued, Abby's marriage began to slowly deteriorate. They quarreled more and more often, and there were fewer and fewer nights when they didn't go to bed angry with each other. She knew they had both failed each other. She had stubbornly rejected all his advances, and he had given up trying, giving in to frustration and anger. A while later, Jeremiah told her that he had to check on something and would be gone for a few days. When she asked him about it, he said he just wanted to make sure of something. He left 2 days later. The next day, the nightmare began at the Hawthorne Ranch. It was 2 months before Abby was able to meet Jeremiah. Taking a deep breath, Abby closed her eyes and remembered one of the worst days of her life. Next chapter. Thompsonville, Colorado, spring 1880. Jeremiah drove cautiously up to the ranch. He knew things were not right. The last 2 months had not brought him satisfaction. First, he had gone to Leadville to check on his father's investments. Once safe, he traveled to Denver to find out when Henry Thompson laid claim to the Wilson Ranch. Something wasn't right. The dates he'd given Abby didn't match the way things had actually happened. He went to the law firm Henry used and asked a few questions. He was told he needed to talk to Mr. Horace, who should be back in a couple of hours. He went into the saloon across the street to wait. Not 30 minutes later, the man accused him of insulting his family and hit him. A few minutes later, both he and the man ended up in the Denver City Jail. He was tried and convicted despite his statement that he had never seen the man before that day. 30 days later, he was given another 30 days for reasons unknown. After his release, he went to the lawyer's office again, but was told that Mr. Horace was out of town. He was also told that the documents he was looking for were missing. The man speculated that Mr. Horace might have them for some reason. He realized the strangeness of it all when he got to Thompsonville. He walked into a small saloon and found that Pedro and Maria Mendez were gone. The new owner served him and disappeared. A few minutes later, he reappeared and informed Jeremiah that he was no longer welcome. Surprised and annoyed, Jeremiah left and headed home. When he reached the ranch, there was a welcoming party waiting for him. Abby was there along with her father. Besides them, a Swede and a small, well-dressed man were there. To his surprise, Jeremiah noticed that Thomas was with them as well. Jeremiah quickly got off his horse and approached the group. "Tom," said Jeremiah, smiling, "when did you get back?" "About 6 weeks ago," Thomas replied coldly. Jeremiah was surprised at his brother's reaction, but quickly turned his attention to his wife. As he approached her, he reached out to enclose her in his arms, but instead, he felt her hand slap his face. "You bastard!" screamed Abby. "How could you do this to me?" "What are you talking about, Abby?" "Maria Mendez. And don't play dumb with me." "I'm not playing dumb, I just don't know what you're talking about." "Maria and Pedro visited us 2 days after you ran away." "I didn't run away. I went to Denver to check on a couple things before I talked to you about it. When I got there, a stranger accused me of something and then started fighting with me. I've spent the last 2 months in the Denver City Jail." "Why did you end up in Denver?" "Abby, we need to talk about this in private." "No. We'll say whatever we need to say right here. I know why you ran away. Maria told me everything." "What are you talking about, woman?" Maria said she had a child. Oh my God, Jeremiah snorted. Whoever the father is, better run before Pedro gets to them. She said it was you, you bastard. She said you are the father. Me? Replied Jeremiah, shocked. And you're right, Henry interjected. Pedro was displeased and came after you. Pedro never spoke to me, Jeremiah declared. It's not funny, y'all. No, son, it's not funny, Henry said patronizingly. Don't you ever call me that, you hear me? Growled Jeremiah. I'm not your boy, and I have never touched Maria. Abby, you have to believe me. She said you did, and then you shot her Pepe. What? Stuttered Jeremiah. Is Pedro dead? No, said Henry. You just shot him in the arm. I didn't shoot Pedro, and I certainly didn't sleep with Maria. That's not what they're saying, Henry continued, and that's not what they told the Colorado Springs sheriff. That's a lie. Where are they? I'll get to the truth of it. They've already gone, cried Abby with tears in her eyes. Yes, replied Henry calmly. They left shortly after talking to the sheriff. I think they were headed for Santa Fe or further south. What? They just picked up and abandoned their boarding house and saloon? No, I bought it back from them so they'd have the money to start over somewhere else. It stinks, Henry. It smells like someone's trying to set me up. Jeremiah turned to his wife. Abby, you can't believe. Jeremiah's heart sank when he saw her in the arms of Thomas, who was comforting her. The expression on his face was replaced with anger and deep sadness. No, he moaned. Abby, please tell me you're not. Thomas, why are you holding my wife? She was in pain, Jeremiah. After what you did, she was in pain. I didn't do anything, replied Jeremiah sharply, the anger beginning to return. So you came back just in time to fly in and take my place? Is that what you're telling me, dear brother? How long have you been sleeping in my bed? Thomas answered nothing and pulled Abby tighter against him. You son of a bitch, growled Jeremiah and headed toward Thomas. Unfortunately, he was so focused on the pair that he didn't notice the giant shadow moving towards him. The Swede hit him once, but it was more than enough to knock Jeremiah out. When he came to, he was lying on the floor inside the room. He struggled to get up and leaned against the wall to keep his balance. In front of him sat Henry and a small, well-dressed man. Swede stood next to them, followed by Abby and Thomas. Where's Sarah? He wheezed. She's back at my ranch, Henry answered calmly. We didn't think she needed to see that travesty. Ashamed of yourself, Henry? You should be ashamed of yourself. I'm sorry, Jeremiah, but that sounds very hypocritical coming from a man who impregnated a girl and then shot her father. I didn't do anything like that. They said you did. Jeremiah looked around the room for anyone who might believe him and found no one. Regardless of your denials, Henry continued, there are some things you should know. The sheriff in Colorado Springs has issued a warrant for your arrest. Mr. Horace and I have persuaded him not to turn it over just yet. Mr. Horace? Yes, Mr. Horace is my attorney from Denver. I have mentioned him before. He's the one I was looking for in Denver. They said you had the documents I was looking for, the one about Henry's purchase of land on Old Man Wilson's ranch. Why were you looking for that particular one? Inquired Henry. Because the date you say Wilson's grandson sold you the land doesn't match up with when it was supposedly written. If my calculations are correct, those documents were written before Old Man Wilson died in the fire. That means you're lying about what you know about it. That's absurd, pouted Henry. I had nothing to do with it. Mr. Hawthorne, I assure you that you are mistaken, added Mr. Horace. So where are these documents? Your office said you had them. They were wrong too. I don't have them. That's all nonsense, interposed Henry. Just the attempts of a guilty man to vilify others in order to lessen the gravity of his own actions. Boy, you ought to know that I'm the one preventing the warrant from being issued. Now, unless you want to become a criminal, I suggest you listen carefully. Mr. Horace has some papers for you to sign. They will transfer your part of the ranch to Thomas. In exchange for that, no warrant will ever be issued. Your wife and daughter will be taken care of for the rest of their lives. My wife is a cheating whore, and my traitorous brother is taking care of her. Abby gasped and clung to Thomas. Jeremiah took a step toward the couple, but the Swede stood in front of him. Sit down! Don't make me hurt you! The giant growled. Jeremiah looked into the faces of his accusers. He realized he had lost. Spending time in the Colorado Springs jail was useless. Henry would find witnesses to lie against him, and Thomas would still get his share of the ranch. Fortunately, his father had foreseen the potential problems associated with the ranch. It was a small victory, considering what Jeremiah had lost. There was no choice but to back down. He agreed to their terms and asked to say goodbye to Sarah before leaving. They refused. They told her that he had run away a month ago. That day, Jeremiah Hawthorne left the valley a defeated man. Next chapter. Crested Butte, Colorado. Late summer, 1885. Abby, remembering that terrible day, brushed a small tear from her eye. Jeremiah had seemed so sincere in his denial of his actions, but the evidence against him showed otherwise. She herself was worried about her actions at the time. Did I give up on our marriage too soon? She asked herself. What if Jeremiah was telling the truth and didn't run away? Then I really was an adulteress. After meeting Maria, Abby was at loose ends. The first few days she couldn't get through without heavy sobbing. It was 2 weeks after that meeting when Thomas returned. She wished she could say she hadn't run into his arms, but she knew she had. She found comfort in them, protection from the storm that was tearing her world apart. 2 weeks after his arrival, he tracked her down. He had shared a bed with her ever since. When Jeremiah returned, he realized she was different and now belonged to Thomas. 3 months after the confrontation with Jeremiah, Thomas and Sarah's wedding took place. Sarah was beyond happy. She couldn't believe that her father could have done what he was accused of. She was only 10 years old at the time. She was young and naive. Naive? She was just a girl. What was my excuse? Why didn't I stand with Jeremiah then? Why had I chosen my father and then Thomas over my husband? These were the questions she had been battling over for the past few years. They were questions to which she had no answers. Sarah aside, the years that followed were relatively quiet. Her marriage to Thomas had not been easy. Thomas had become increasingly emotionally reserved. When he learned of his mother's death 3 years ago, he simply brushed off all feelings. Abby realized that he hadn't seen her in over 15 years, but hoped he wouldn't be so callous about it. As Thomas continued to hide his feelings, Abby grew more and more distant from her husband. Adding to the lack of intimacy was Abby's creeping suspicion that Thomas was unfaithful. She feared this was happening during Thomas's monthly visits to Colorado Springs. Several times she had confronted him, and each time he had denied it. Unfortunately, she had no proof. Now his wanderlust was starting to show again. She sensed he resented being stuck at the ranch, and his drinking was getting worse. 4 months ago, it had all exploded. Sarah had always resented Thomas for trying to take her father's place. It seemed that her anger at him never subsided. And one night when Abby was at her father's ranch, he did just that. Sarah claimed it went beyond that. According to her, he had touched her. Thomas flatly denied it. Sarah didn't know what to do. She didn't know who to believe, her daughter or her husband. Abby was confused. Henry intervened. He reprimanded Sarah for trying to stir up a hornet's nest in the midst of their negotiations with the railroad. He didn't think Thomas should have punished her the way he did, but he thought Sarah had misunderstood what had happened. Sarah was crushed and ran off to her room. Abby tried to comfort her, but Sarah would not allow her to do so, as she sided with Thomas and her father. Much to Abby's dismay, she allowed Sarah to be left alone. 2 weeks later, Sarah ran away. They searched for her for days and even reported seeing her in Colorado Springs. That's where they lost her from. Abby cried for days while Thomas tried to comfort her. Even now, Abby sometimes fell asleep at night thinking about her daughter. Thankfully, 2 months ago, they received news that Sarah was alive and well in Leadville. The finding was unexpected, as the man who found her was not actually looking for her, but for Jeremiah. A few months earlier, Henry had discovered that Thomas did not own a controlling interest in the Hawthorne Ranch. It seems that Mr. Hawthorne had used the 51% stake in the ranch to obtain a loan to buy a small business in Leadville. The profits from this business were used to provide for Mrs. Hawthorne after his death. When Mrs. Hawthorne passed away, the business and share passed to Jeremiah. Jeremiah now owned a controlling interest in the Hawthorne Ranch. Henry hired a man to track down Jeremiah. His search inadvertently led him to Sarah. She lived and worked as a maid for a wealthy widow named Wilcox in Leadville. A few weeks later, Jeremiah was found near Ashcroft. Now Abby and her posse were headed there to convince Jeremiah to sell or sign over all or part of his rights to the ranch. The meeting was going to be emotional and unpleasant. "This is a bad idea," Abby stated emphatically. "What?" replied Thomas. "I said it's a very bad idea." "We don't have much choice." "Mrs. Hawthorne," Horace added, "we must do everything we can to convince your ex-husband to sign over at least a small portion of your ranch. The deal your father is working on with the railroad requires full access through the valley." "I understand that, Mr. Horace, but I don't know how we can do it. If Jeremiah still believes we've betrayed him and set him up, there's little we can offer him." "Not true. Besides the hefty sum of money I'm carrying, we have a few other incentives." "Surely you don't think an apology from Thomas or me will convince him?" "No, not in itself," Horace explained. "However, that and a good sum of money and perhaps some ownership of many of Thompsonville's businesses should help to ease the hostility. We will offer that the old warrant for his arrest is gone forever. In addition, we will offer information on Sarah's whereabouts. That way, he can be reunited with her. I think that will help seal the deal." "I'm not so sure, Mr. Horace," she thought to herself. The look of pain and betrayal on his face that day? That look had haunted her for years. It screamed his innocence in the face of the evidence of his guilt. She was so hurt by his betrayal that it tore at her heart. Even though their marriage was in dire straits, she loved Jeremiah. His long absence and heartache left her lost and alone. When Thomas returned, she immediately threw herself into his arms. He had been there for her in her most difficult moment. Abby's reverie was broken by a loud voice as she approached. It was a tall man with a huge smile. "Yes, sir. We'll have you to Ashcroft in no time." The man stopped in front of the group. "Well, is everyone ready? We'll be hitting the road soon. The trip will be a bit slow and some sections will be quite difficult, but we should get you to Ashcroft this afternoon. We will be going over the Pearl Pass. Very beautiful, but a little rough." Abby realized that she had just met Mr. Buckman. The man continued talking the entire time the group was walking to his stagecoach, and then continued as they loaded their belongings. It wasn't until they were leaving Crested Butte that he finally took a breath. "I'm surprised you didn't take the train from Aspen. There used to be a couple stages leaving Ashcroft every day. That was about a year ago, but that's the nature of the beast, isn't it?" "What do you mean?" said Horace. "There must be hundreds of little towns like Ashcroft scattered all over these mountains," grinned Buckman. "Somebody discovers gold or silver and everybody runs away. Of course, a town springs up overnight until the gold runs out, and then everyone runs for the next rumor of a mine. That's what happened to Ashcroft. About 5 years ago, a couple of prospectors got a big silver find. When they came back to Leadville, word of it spread and a real fever started. Within a couple years, a township sprang up that eventually numbered over 3,000 people. The place had over 20 saloons, 2 newspapers, and even a school. A couple of years ago, Hal Tabor's wife tried to turn it into a respectable little town by throwing a big party for a bunch of knuckleheads and toughers. I've never seen so many high-born people in these parts. But nothing could save the town when the silver ran out. Not a few months later, Ashcroft looked like a ghost town. Now I only make a couple flights a month to Ashcroft. Almost every month a hunting party from Leadville or Denver hires me to take them there." "A hunting party?" "Yes, always sent to the Jenkins's place. Sometimes it's John Jenkins himself. Sometimes it's a friend of his named Ambrose from Denver. He's the type, as far as I'm concerned. When it's Ambrose, he always takes this big black guy with him. He's not as big as you, Buckman said, looking at the Swede, but he's big. Is that hunting party already there? Asked Thomas. Yeah, grinned Buckman. Took them 5 days ago. Ambrose, the black guy, and that skinny guy. Skinny guy? Asked Horace. Yeah, a teenager. Looks sickly. Looks a little like Molly, if you know what I mean. Never talks, but always comes in with both sides, Jenkins or Ambrose. I think they're trying to make a man out of him. Maybe make him chest hair by taking him hunting and fishing. Though if you want my opinion, it's not working. Buckman laughed heartily at his own joke. Mr. Buckman, Abby asked cautiously, do you know a man named Jeremiah Hawthorne? I can't say I do, ma'am, but there's a man named Jeremiah in a place called Jenkins. He's a guide at these parties. Never heard the name of Hawthorne, but I think it might be him. We can ask old Zeb when we get to Ashcroft. His daughter and granddaughter live at the Jenkins house, so they'll know for sure. They live there? Yes, Desiree, Zeb's daughter, used to help him run the View Hotel. She's a real beauty, tall as the Amazons and mean as a rattlesnake. Anyway, she got pregnant and her husband died, or vice versa. I don't know which came first, and I certainly won't ask her or old Zeb. Either of them would probably bite my head off. So John Jenkins built a great house for his wife, and she dropped everything and came back to Leadville. Then Jenkins invited Desiree there as housekeeper. I'm not saying there was anything between Jenkins and Desiree, but she's really something. For the rest of the trip, Bachman gave them a scenic tour. Abby chuckled to herself when he started telling things she knew weren't entirely true. He was amusing. As they pulled into Ashcroft, Abby realized why Bachman had called it a ghost town. There were dozens and dozens of makeshift tent frames and shabby buildings. A few buildings, however, looked well made. Two in particular caught her eye. The first was a 2-story hotel called Hotel View. The second was the well-built Blue Mirror Saloon. What was noticeably missing were the people. Only a few passers-by could be seen on the street. Buckman stopped his stage in front of the Weed Hotel. Reaching down, he looked at the hotel and then at the few remaining saloons. Zeb, shouted Buckman, I've got company for you. 3 older men came out of one of the saloons. I suppose he'll be at the Blue Mirror, grinned Buckman. One of the men approached them. He was a short man with a disheveled beard and the same hair. His wide smile showed a few missing teeth. Good evening, folks, he said in a thick Cajun accent. Welcome to the Weed Hotel. If you'll take your things and follow me, we'll fix you up. These people, Bachman continued, will need someone to take them to... Mr. Buckman, Horace interrupted. Thank you for your help, but we'll take it from here. You're welcome, Bachman smiled. Just let me know when you're ready. I'll be back here the day after tomorrow to pick up the hunting party, but I can come back another day if you need me to. No, sir, Horace said. The day after tomorrow will be fine. Abby and her company went up to their rooms, then went downstairs and met on the porch. She noticed that a mule harnessed to a wagon was already waiting for them. Horace stated that he had already told Zeb what they needed and that he would drive them 2 miles to their destination. The Jenkins's house was located to the south, near Taylor's Peak. It was only a few minutes after they left Ashcroft before Horace asked Zeb a question. Mr. A. Zeb will do just fine. All right, Zeb. You didn't seem very surprised when I asked you to take us to Jenkins' place. No, the old Cajun smiled. A month ago, a stranger came to town asking about Jeremiah. It wasn't hard to guess that there was a fox in the hen house. If it had been a year or 2 ago, no one would have noticed. But when everyone left, a man asking questions about one of the few that remained, it became noticeable. How many are left in Ashcroft? Interposed Thomas. About 100, give or take, Zeb replied. There were over 3,500 a couple years ago, but then the silver ran out and they went on a big strike around Aspen. Most of them left before winter. Now there's only a handful left in town, with a few dozen more mining silver in the surrounding area. Sir? Abby said cautiously. Mr. Buckman said you have a daughter and granddaughter living in Jenkins' place? Buckman talks a hell of a lot, snorted Zeb. I hope you didn't tell him anything you didn't want everyone within a 20-mile radius to know by morning. Shaking his head slowly, he looked over his shoulder at Abby. Yes, ma'am. My granddaughter's name is Monique, but we call her Lil Mo. She and her mom have been staying with the Jenkinses for 4 years now. She used to help me at the inn until she had the baby. Mr. Jenkins was kind enough to let her live in his new house. Now she and Jeremiah look after the house when Mr. Jenkins isn't home. That's most of the time, because Mrs. Jenkins never liked it here. She liked her big house in Leadville better. Aren't you afraid for their safety? Asked Abby. I guess so, but it's no more dangerous there than anywhere else on the grounds. Perhaps even safer than at home after the war. Desiree can manage quite well on her own. Besides Jeremiah, Robbie's still there. He's a bit of a fool, but loyal as a raccoon dog. They still had a couple of working hands, but they left for Aspen last fall. Of course, more of those darn dogs. Dogs? Replied Thomas. Yeah, a few years ago, Mr. Jenkins came across 3 abandoned puppies. Turned out they were part wolf cubs. They were cautious as hell, but they made damn good watchdogs. Jenkins had 2 older dogs who took them in. Now they run as a pack, are very territorial and protective of each other. What surprised everyone was how quickly they took to my Desiree and Lil Mo. One night 2 years ago, a couple of prospectors came up to the house unannounced. The dogs killed one and maimed the other. Abby gasped in horror, while the other 3 men listened intently. So no, ma'am, I'm not particularly worried. No more than any man worries about his family. Will we be safe? Asked Horace. We ought to be. It's dawning already, and I've been to this place so many times that they'll recognize me. I'll ring the bell to make sure Desiree puts them out. Will Jeremiah be there? Asked Abby cautiously. I doubt it. He's probably gone hunting or fishing with Ambrose. They usually spend a night or 2 out there and then go back to the house, depending on what they've shot. Then the next morning they're on the road again. As they approached the clearing, they saw a bell mounted on a pole. Zeb got off the wagon, walked over to it, and rang it. He had barely had time to climb back into the wagon when they heard dogs barking and a woman's voice shouting commands. A moment later, another bell rang, which rang twice. Zeb steered the wagon across the clearing. On the hill, they saw a large 2-story house, behind which was a small tavern and barn. That'll be Jenkins's place, Zeb announced. Riding slowly up to the split fence, Zeb jumped down and untied the mules. Before he could say anything to his passengers, there was a hoarse squeal. Pappy! A dark-haired girl screamed, running up to them. Zeb laughed, picking her up in his arms, and she squealed again. It's Lil Mo. She's not very tall, but we're hoping. Pappy, Mommy says I'm going to grow up. Speaking of your mommy, Zeb said, smiling. Where is she? Right here, replied a smiling young woman standing on the porch. Waiting for your old hide to bring a bag of curls into the house. She was tall, nearly 6 feet, and quite beautiful, though oddly dressed. She had a swarthy face, indicating her Cajun ancestry. She had her long black curls gathered into a simple ponytail, and was dressed in a simple dress. She was also wearing a pair of pants tucked into the front of the dress. Her gentle smile faded as she looked at Abby and her company. What can I do for you? We're here to see Jeremiah Hawthorne, Horace stated. Is he here? And who is asking for you? My name is Edmund Horace, and we have a business proposition for him. And there are 4 of you to ask? She asked, scrutinizing the Swede. No, ma'am, Horace continued. This is Mr. Hawthorne's brother and ex-wife. They're here to talk to Jeremiah and heal old wounds. Mr. Swanson is here for our protection, since I'm bringing a decent amount of money with me. Desiree nodded. Fair enough. I'll send Robbie to fetch him. He went with a hunting party to Taylor Pass yesterday. Robbie. A tall, burly man in his early 20s ran up to them. It was obvious that he could be described as touched or slow. One eye was slightly lined, and he carried one arm oddly. On his face shone a perpetual smile that was infectious. It shone even brighter when he turned to Desiree. "Yes, Miss Ray?" "Go get Jeremiah. He took them to Taylor's Pass." "Yes, ma'am," Robbie grinned. "And Robbie, make sure they hear you coming. I don't want them shooting you by mistake." Robbie took off quickly, but the others could hear him cackling as he ran. "I expected them to be back tomorrow, but if Robbie finds them quickly, they should be back in a couple hours. You can wait inside, but those barking irons need to be left by the door. There is a chest behind the door to put them in, and they will be safe. Don't bring any weapons into the house or I'll set the dogs on you, understood?" Everyone nodded and followed her into the house. Desiree watched closely as Thomas and Swede put the weapons away in the trunk. As soon as Abby entered the house, she immediately recoiled back. The house was large and posh, but the furnishings were ordinary and practical. The place looked more like a hunting lodge than a house. "I have some salt pork and cookies I can heat up if you're hungry," said Abby sharply, clearly hoping no one would take advantage of her offer. "And gravy?" asked Zeb, ignoring her tone. "Gravy!" squealed Mo. Desiree threw her father a dirty look. "Fine!" Desiree snorted. "Pappy, take them into the living room. I'll go and get started." "Is that jug still hiding behind the rocking chair?" grinned Zeb. Desiree hummed and turned to go back into the kitchen. "Can I help?" asked Abby softly. "I don't need to." "Me neither." "I want to help," screamed Mo, trying to break free from her grandfather's embrace. Desiree sighed, looking at her daughter. "Okay, I guess I need the help now." While the men settled down in the living room with a large jug of moonshine, Abby followed Desiree and her daughter into the kitchen. While Mo played with a small spoon and pot, Abby broke the awkward silence. "She's beautiful," Abby declared, looking at the playing girl. "She's a handful," Desiree replied, not looking away from her work. "Ah, Jeremiah is her father?" asked Abby quietly. Desiree stopped her work and stared at Abby. "No, Mo's father died before she was born. He worked in one of Mr. Jenkins and Hal Tabor's mines. He died of a fever 2 weeks before I found out I was pregnant. I was helping Pappy at the Weed Hotel then. Then Mr. Jenkins built this beautiful house and hired my fat pregnant ass to work here. I think he did it out of charity, but I was grateful anyway. That's when I met Jeremiah. I'd seen him around Ashcroft a few times before that. He came here following Mr. Jenkins from Leadville and worked in the mines for a while. One day, Jeremiah overheard one of the bookkeepers say something to Mr. Jenkins that was not right. Later, Jeremiah approached Mr. Jenkins and told him of his concerns. It turned out that the accountant had been embezzling some of the profits. "Yes," Abby agreed. "Jeremiah was always good with numbers and studying the books. Mr. Jenkins was impressed and transferred him from the mines to here. I think so he could keep an eye on me, and also so he could study the books from each mine." What Jeremiah didn't understand, he asked the other accountants at the mines. He found a few things, nothing as bad as the man who was downing money, but some things helped. He's been very successful in the last few years. Desiree looked at Abby and paused as if trying to decide if she should continue. Abby looked back and began to ask a very personal question. "Are you—" began Abby. "I mean, Jeremiah and I are a couple?" Desiree replied with a smirk. "Not for a long time now. Until a couple years ago, though, we were. Jeremiah helped me when Mo and I got so big I could barely keep up with homework. He talked to me at night when I was lonely and took care of me. After Mo was born, he took care of both of us. He was so scarred when I first met him. Not on the outside, but on the inside. We helped each other, I think. But we weren't lovers until a few months after Mo was born. There was something between us from the beginning. We didn't give each other moon kisses, but there was some love. He's a damn good man, but we weren't going to spend the rest of our lives together. Still, I spent many nights in his bed, and I doubt he had any complaints. Then Mrs. Tabor's big party happened, and in a couple of months everything changed." "And then what happened?" asked Abby softly. "Why did everything change?" "Jeremiah met someone." Desiree stammered. "Well, special. Who? Asked Abby, and immediately realized she had gone too far. Desiree's eyes flashed and her body tensed. The expression on her face turned cold and dangerous. What's it to you? She snapped back. You threw him out like he was a piss bucket. I didn't, Abby began. Don't lie to me, bitch, growled Desiree. I know who you are. When I first met him, he was like a man who lived each day praying that it would be his last. It wasn't until Mo was born that I started to see life in his eyes again. So don't pretend you care about him. I know what you and those bastards sitting there did to him, and it almost killed him. I did what? Retorted Abby loudly, her own anger building. What about what he did to me? What did he do to you? He cheated on me and got a girl pregnant. Says who? The girl he cheated with said so. What if she wasn't telling the truth? Why would she lie? I don't know. Why would she lie? What reason could she possibly have for that? She wouldn't, shouted Abigail. Jeremiah was wrong, grinned Desiree. You're not blind, you're dumb as a stump. Hey, shouted Zeb from the living room. Do you need any help? Come into my kitchen, old man, shouted Desiree back, and you'll get a frying pan to the head. Desiree looked at her daughter, whose eyes were as big as saucers. Baby, go climb on your pappy's lap and ask him if he's going to hell because he drinks so much, like the preacher says. Okay, Mom, she said, dropping her things and running into the living room. A few seconds later, Zeb called out to her. This isn't right, Ray. No, it's not right, she retorted. So stay out of it. Turning to face Abby, she squeezed out a smile that gave Abby goosebumps. So where were we? Oh yeah, you were going to tell me why you believed this woman over your husband. No, wait. You didn't even give him a chance to defend himself, did you? He disappeared for 2 months. Did you even go looking for him, or did you just crawl into bed with his brother that night? It wasn't like that. Well, you better get your story straight and come up with a damn good explanation for Jeremiah when he gets back. Because otherwise, he's going to kick you all off this property, no matter how big that Viking is. Abby took a deep breath and swallowed her answer. They needed to keep their conversation with Jeremiah as calm as possible for as long as possible. If this was what was in store for them, confronting Jeremiah was going to be horrible. Abby worked silently beside Desiree as they prepared and served an impromptu meal. A few hours later, just before sunset, they heard the dogs heralding someone's arrival. A few minutes later, quiet voices were heard outside. Abby realized that Desiree had slipped out and was probably talking to Jeremiah before he arrived. She was probably also letting him know that everyone was safe. Abby felt her stomach clench with anticipation as soon as her ex-husband entered the house. He looked the same as he had 5 years ago, maybe a little skinnier. He was no longer clean-shaven, which Abby had always liked. Instead, he had trimmed his mustache and goatee. Gone also was the soft smile and warmth in his eyes. Now those eyes were cold and hard. That was a fool's errand, she thought to herself again. It seemed Jeremiah was about to yell at them, but he was interrupted. Me, ah! The girl screamed and lunged at him. Without looking, he caught her and spun her around. Her delighted squeal brought a temporary smile to everyone's faces. Jeremiah enclosed her in a tight bear hug, and she giggled. Abby felt a prick of sadness, remembering Jeremiah doing the same thing to Sarah when she was little. Mo, you little rascal, go find your mommy, he laughed, lowering her to the ground. She's outside with your daddy and Robbie. The girl scurried out the door, laughing as she went. Jeremiah turned and looked after them. His look let everyone know that all the joy was gone with this girl. What do you all want? He said coldly. Mr. Hawthorne, began Mr. Horace. We have come here with a proposition which I think will be of great service to you. I remember you. You are King Henry's herald. Have you not this month thrown orphans or widows into the streets? I assumed you got some sort of bonus for such deeds, since you sold your soul to the devil. Mr. Hawthorne, I assure you. Stop there, Jeremiah interrupted him. Your assurances mean nothing. I would trust a rattlesnake before either of you. Be that as it may, sir, I believe we have a business proposition that will be beneficial to all. There was not an ounce of mirth in Jeremiah's laughter. So King Henry finally found out he doesn't control the ranch? Found out about the stable at Leadville, did he? Well, yes. We were all very surprised. You bet. My old man may have been a little touched in the head when he came back from the war, but he could still smell a skunk. He asked that bank in Leadville to lend him money to partner with someone he knew from the war to buy that livery. Against that loan, he mortgaged a controlling interest in our ranch. Each month, the profits would be divided, and our share would go to pay off the loan. And when he died, Mom would be paid an allowance. That way, she would have a steady stream of money no matter what happened to the ranch. He put it in my and Mom's names since he knew I wouldn't run away and leave her, Jeremiah said, looking at Thomas. He would have left it to both of us if you had stayed. I never wanted to stay on the ranch, Thomas stated. But when you left, you broke both Mama and Abby's hearts. I needed to get away and be on my own. I have no problem with that. Of course, that didn't stop you from coming back and laying claim to a stranger, did it, dear brother? Gentlemen, please, exclaimed Horace. It won't do any good. Who said I was trying to be helpful? Barked Jeremiah. Mr. Hawthorne, I understand that you are angry and feel that you have been wronged. I have been wronged. I was stabbed in the back by those I loved and trusted. So why are you here? Please, Jeremiah, whimpered Abby. Please listen to us. Like you listened to me? Abby blushed and spoke very softly. You're right. What happened the day you left was wrong. It was bad, and then it got worse. I'm sorry we all jumped on you like that. You, Thomas, and I need to sit down and talk this out. We all have something to say. But first, you need to hear what Mr. Horace is proposing, so we all have cards in our hands. Please, Jeremiah, just hear him out. All right, Jeremiah growled and walked over to a chair. Let's get this over with. Once seated, he watched everyone find a seat. You blabbermouth, he said, as he continued to look at Mr. Horace. How are you going to bribe me this time? Mr. Hawthorne, Horace began, ignoring his hostility. I've come to offer you a few things in exchange for all or part of your holdings on the ranch. Jeremiah shook his head and snorted. What do you have that I might need? For starters, I have a substantial amount of money. Jeremiah didn't respond in any way. In addition, Horace continued, I have records of several documents in Thompsonville that can be used to back up any agreement we may need. Go on, Jeremiah said briefly. Besides, I know the Pedro Mendez incident can be made to disappear forever. The threat of a warrant will no longer hang over your head. Jeremiah leaned back in his chair and seemed to reflect. Is that all? Said Jeremiah calmly. No, other than clearing up the situation with your ex-wife and brother, Horace smiled. We have information that may help you reunite with your daughter Sarah. Really? Said Jeremiah warily. So why isn't she here? Unfortunately, she ran away. Ran away? Why did she run away? She ran away, Thomas interjected, because she didn't like me sunning myself behind her back when she resented me. She always resented me for marrying Abby. Showed she was smart. Calm yourself, sir, Horace replied evenly. So where is she? We know where she is and that she is safe. We are prepared to share that information with you as soon as we finalize our business here. Mr. Hawthorne, Horace continued in a slightly condescending voice, it is obvious that you have no interest in returning to the valley. Why not sever all remaining ties with a place that brings you no joy? Surely we can come to some agreement that will suit both parties. You are right about one thing, Jeremiah said, as he looked at Thomas and Abby. I have not the slightest desire to return to that valley. Since Sarah is no longer there is no one there that I could care less about. Jeremiah, Abby said softly, I'm sorry that we ran into you that day. Things were so twisted back then. I know I didn't do right by you. Didn't do me right? Wow, grinned Jeremiah. I got thrown in the Denver City jail for a fight I didn't start. People I've never met lie about me, and I spend 2 months locked up. When I finally return home, I find that I have been tried and convicted without even being given a chance to defend myself. On top of that, my wife is now sleeping with my brother. I always knew you had a thing for Thomas, but I thought you were mine when we got married. I never thought you'd turn into a cheating whore. And I never thought you'd share a bed with another woman, let alone get pregnant by her. Still can't believe me, huh? Said Jeremiah, shaking his head. Still can't believe that I've been set up and that King Henry is behind this? No, he wouldn't do that. I heard that Pedro and Maria's official testimony was recorded in Denver. Not only that, but they swore that their story was very different from what they told you. Mr. Hawthorne, began Horace. Shut up, you blabbermouth. It's my turn now. They told the Denver sheriff, he said, without taking his eyes off Abby, that they were forced to lie to you. They said the Swede threatened them and then shot Pedro to frame me. Liar! Swede bellowed, rising to his feet. He froze as he heard the trigger of the gun being pulled back. Everyone turned their attention to the attractive Amazon standing in the doorway, aiming a shotgun at Swede's chest. Sit back down, she said coldly, or I swear to God I'll kill you right here. The big man slowly lowered himself into the chair. Jeremiah and the Swede stared at each other. You don't believe me? Jeremiah stated emphatically. Go to Denver and see for yourself. Abby looked at Jeremiah, then at the Swede. Her stomach began to turn as she finally seriously considered the fact that she had been lied to. That unpleasant possibility was slowly creeping into her thoughts. However, Jeremiah wasn't done yet. I have a couple questions for you, her ex-husband said, turning to her and Thomas. You both, Jeremiah's voice sounded sarcastic, must have found it suspicious that my troublemaking brother returned so soon after I left? Abby remained silent as Thomas answered. Henry sent me a telegram a few days after your disappearance and the Mendices' visit. How did he know how to find you? He had contacted me several months earlier. You never told me that, shrieked Abby. Thomas looked at her innocently. What was there to tell? Your father sent me a letter asking me to come home. He hoped I could help him convince Jeremiah to pool our resources and offer a deal to the railroad. I didn't want to go back until I learned of the trouble Jeremiah was in. Brother, I'm sorry things turned out this way for you, but I didn't come back to take your place. When I arrived, you were already gone, and Abby was alone and suffering. I stayed for her. So Henry sent someone to find you before he sent you the letter? Asked Jeremiah calmly when Thomas nodded. And then Henry sent someone to find me here in Ashcroft? Thomas nodded again. Then why was he able to find you, Thomas, after 10 years of searching, and me after 5 years of absence, but couldn't find me sitting in a damned Denver jail for 2 months now? Surely you've both been looking for me, haven't you? Surely Mr. Mouthpiece knew I'd contacted his Denver office. It wouldn't have been that hard to ask someone from the sheriff's office about me, would it? Neither Abby nor Thomas could continue to look him in the eye. Guilt was written all over their faces. Truth be told, Jeremiah continued, neither of you cared if I came back. I was already guilty and condemned even without a trial. You all had already cheated me. You stabbed the man you said you loved in the back, your own relative. So you can all take back your pathetic apologies and burn in hell. Jeremiah stood before them, hesitant to meet their gaze. His face was contorted with pain, and his nostrils flared like a bull preparing to attack. After a few moments of awkward silence, Jeremiah turned to Mr. Horace. So here's my answer, Harold. Mr. Hawthorne, began Horace again. You have nothing that I need. I don't trust you enough to believe you really know where my daughter is, and there isn't so much gold in these mountains for you to bribe me with. Go back to your master and tell him it will be a cold day in hell before he ever gets his hands on my family's ranch. It's dark outside now, so I won't kick you out of here, but in the morning I want you out. Abigail, you can stay in one of the rooms in the ranch house. Zeb, you and Robbie sleep here too. Those three can spread out in the cabin. Those barking irons will stay in the trunk until you leave, understood? Almost everyone nodded as Jeremiah went to the door and called out to Robbie. Everyone heard him run up to the house. Robbie, I'll leave at dawn and meet up with Ambrose and the others. Could you see to it that my horse is ready? Of course, Jeremiah. Jeremiah turned to the group. You have a few minutes before Robbie lets the dogs go for the night, so I wouldn't waste any time here. Those barking irons will stay in the trunk until you leave. Careful not to wander around here in the dark. Dogs are quite dangerous at night. I'm a little tired. If you will allow me, I will go to bed. With these words, the group slowly dispersed. Soon, everyone could already hear the barking of dogs watching the neighborhood. Next chapter. Jeremiah sat down on his horse. The sun had just set, and he knew that some places in Taylor's Pass were still in darkness. One had to be careful. Some of the cliffs there were very steep. Slowly looking back at Robbie, he nodded. Is he gone? Robbie nodded and grinned. Sometime during the night, probably before I let the dogs out. Jeremiah nodded in agreement. Robbie, let the dogs out and keep your eyes open. Keep an eye on Ray and Mo. I hope to see you tonight, and if not, tomorrow morning. Sure thing, Jeremiah, Robbie nodded. Jeremiah sighed, walking slowly outside. His skin was covered in goosebumps and his heart raced. He knew that Horace wasn't going to give up that easily. What he, or more likely King Henry, would do next kept him in suspense. Nevertheless, things had come to a head, and stopping it would be like stopping a landslide. As he rode, he smiled as he heard Robbie yelling at the dogs. If anyone was asleep, it wasn't now. He knew he would have to be careful as there would be a difficult trail ahead. The parts of the road that were sunlit were breathtakingly beautiful, and those that remained in the shadows could be dangerous. Taking a deep breath, he tried to clear his thoughts. Meeting Abby and Thomas had reopened old wounds. Past feelings of anger and bitterness tried to rise to the surface. He forced himself to focus and keep his guard up. At the Jenkins house, everyone gathered for breakfast. Ray was serving biscuits and gravy, much to Mo's delight. Where's the Swede? Asked Abby to Thomas. Asked Abby to Thomas. Asked Abby to Thomas. I don't know. He slept in the barn last night. In the barn? Yeah, he has a terrible snore. Sounded like a train, so he agreed to spend the night in the barn. He's probably still in there. Abby turned and was taken aback by what she saw in Desiree's eyes. She was frightened. Next chapter. Jeremiah slowly descended on his horse into a small, shadowy ravine. His eyes had not yet had time to adjust when he heard the click of a rifle trigger being pulled. He jumped off his horse and rushed away from that sound just as the ravine exploded with the sound of gunfire. The dogs heralded someone's approach. Everyone began to come out onto the porch. Before going out, Thomas went to the trunk and pulled out his gun, which he had put there when they first arrived. When he went outside, everyone saw a lone horse with two riders slowly approaching the house. Jeremiah and Zeb got off their horses, and Jeremiah said something briefly to Robbie. Robbie got back on his horse and rode quickly toward Taylor's Pass. As Jeremiah and Zeb started walking toward them, Abby noticed the fury on her ex-husband's face. She noticed that he kept his hand on his gun as they approached. She felt Thomas begin to slowly back away from her. Without warning, Jeremiah pulled out his gun and aimed directly at Thomas. You reach for it, you son of a bitch, Jeremiah growled, and I'll blow your head off whether it's related or not. Now throw that barking iron on the porch and be careful. And you, Jeremiah growled at Horace, you better not hide in those fancy clothes. I assure you. Nonsense. Zeb, search him. If you find any weapons on him, gut him like a fish. Zeb smiled and pulled out a long, thin knife. Horace turned white and raised his hands in front of him. I guess I didn't notice, he stammered. In the inside pocket of my coat. Zeb reached into the lawyer's top coat and pulled out a small single-shot pistol. Mr. Hawthorne, Horace began, before Jeremiah interrupted him. If you say I assure you again, I'll shoot you. You're lucky you didn't try to get that thing, or you'd be deader than that bastard Swede. What? Gasped Abby. That bastard tried to set me up in the Taylor Pass area. He snuck up behind me and jumped me, but old Zeb put him down. He's dead? Said Horace, clearly shaken. Where's the body? At the bottom of an old abandoned mine, Jeremiah smiled. I hope he keeps Tommy Knockers company. Are you sure he's dead? Asked Thomas. Sure as I'm standing here, Zeb grinned gloatingly. I put a hole in his back. You shot him in the back? He was going to shoot your brother in the back. I just shot him first. I feel safer now, Jeremiah said, then looked at Abby and frowned. Ray, search her, he said, pointing at Abby. Make sure she's not hiding anything. Jeremiah! Abby shrieked in surprise. I would never! You can't believe that! Why should I believe you? There was no reply, only an awkward silence. Take her inside, Ray. When both women were gone, Thomas cleared his throat. Do you really think Abby is armed? I don't think I trust either of you. Doesn't it bother you if Abby has a gun? Said Thomas mockingly, nodding toward the house. Both Jeremiah and Zeb snorted. Thomas, Jeremiah said coldly, a pretty girl like Ray out here among all these wolves, both human and animal? I'd put her up against any of you, except maybe the Swede. Well, maybe him too, since he's worm fodder. As if on cue, both women reappeared. Nothing much, Desiree smirked. At least, nothing special. Abby felt her face flush red, and Zeb's laughter seemed to diffuse the tense situation. The next 2 hours were filled with accusations and denials. Abby and the others denied knowledge, and Jeremiah called them liars. Finally, both groups reached an exhausting stalemate when Robbie's voice was heard in the distance, heralding his return. Slowly, everyone began to come out of the house to meet the returning man. Abby was surprised to see Robbie at the head of a foursome consisting of 2 men, a white man and a black man, and 2 teenagers, a skinny young man and a girl. Even though the girl was dressed in typically male attire, Abby recognized her immediately. It was her daughter, Sarah. Thank God she's safe, she breathed a sigh of relief, and immediately had an epiphany. So that's how he knew so much. Of course she would have told him her side of the story, and he would have believed her. Her gaze slowly settled on the men as they dismounted from their horses. The older white man had a disheveled beard, and he held himself very confidently. He was obviously Ambrose and the leader of the group. Next to him stood a large black man. Buckman was right. He was not as tall as the Swede, but just as muscular. His big, bushy beard was as black as midnight, and his wide, toothy smile was like a crescent moon on a starless night. A young fellow named Sam got off his horse, and Abby immediately realized why Bachman had called him Molly. There were definitely a few girlish features in him. She guessed he was probably a sickly young man. His clothes were baggy and didn't fit him well, and his hairless face was mostly hidden by a large hanging hat. To her surprise, he ran up to Jeremiah and threw himself into his arms. Even from where Abby stood, she could hear his soft sobs. Thought. Lost you. Died, Sam stammered as Jeremiah gently comforted him. Good afternoon, Ambrose's voice came through, drawing everyone's attention. My name is Ambrose, and this is Mr. Jacob, he said, pointing to his black-clad companion. And of course, you've already met Miss Sarah. She's already told us quite a bit about you. And this is Sam, he chuckled. The group turned and watched Sam kiss Jeremiah. The entire Hawthorne company stood in silent amazement. What's the matter, Mom? Sarah smirked. Nothing. I just didn't know, Abby stammered, looking at her daughter. I mean, I know there aren't many women here, but... Sarah burst out laughing and pointed at the couple again. Look again, Mom. Don't let the clothes fool you. Sam's hat fell to the ground, exposing the long blonde braid it had once concealed. Mom, let me introduce you to Sam, Sarah giggled. More like Samantha, she's Daddy's fiancée. Fiancée? Sarah nodded as the couple walked slowly, holding hands towards the group. Abby was struck by the expression on Sam's face. It was contorted, as if she had just smelled something very rotten. I know why you're all here, Sam grinned. I also know that one of you tried to kill my Jeremiah. Now I want you off my property." "Your property?" asked Thomas. "I'm sorry," Sarah interjected with a smile. "I should have introduced her better. Miss Samantha Jenkins Wilcox. This is my mother and her husband." "I want you gone before dark," declared Sam, and turning around, led Jeremiah away. "The girl's got sand, hasn't she?" Ambrose grinned. "She dresses like that to avoid unnecessary attention. You know, the mine owner's daughter roaming the woods? Strange, but it makes a certain amount of sense, doesn't it?" "But we're not done yet," intervened Horace. "The lady said," Jacob growled threateningly, "that you had better leave before nightfall. I'd heed that warning if I were you, mister." Jacob's stare made Horace and Thomas realize that they were in immediate danger. The tension was diffused by Ambrose's strong voice. "Snan, I'm sure there are many questions and things yet to be discussed. However, it seems that some time is needed to cool down. I would suggest that you return to the View Hotel. We'll clean up and cool down, then we'll have dinner and talk. Do you mind, Zeb? Do you think you can convince Widow Brown to cook something for the big feast this evening?" "I think she can probably do it," Zeb snorted. "It's been a while since we've had such a large gathering at the hotel. We'll make sure you both are well compensated." "Well, now that everyone's gone, we certainly won't turn down a dime." With those words, they all went back into the house, leaving Abby, Thomas, and Horace in place. Zeb told them that he would get the harness and take them into town. All the way they rode in silence. When they reached the inn, the trio gathered in one of the rooms. Abby was the first to speak. "Is it true?" she hissed to Thomas. "Was it true what Jeremiah said?" "What exactly?" "Was it true what Jeremiah said about the Mendices?" "How would I know?" "Abigail, I wasn't even there when all this happened." "And we don't even know if what Jeremiah said was true or just gossip," Horace said calmly. "Besides," Horace added, "even if there is some truth to it, it happened 5 years ago. It's already in the past." "That matters," Abby hissed. "Because if I was lied to, that means I betrayed Jeremiah before he betrayed me. My revenge wasn't justified because I cheated on him and slept with his brother." "I'm sorry," Horace said calmly. "I wasn't trying to say it doesn't matter, only that it happened years ago. It's not something that can be changed or taken back." "I understand that, Mr. Horace, but it changes my mind. If it's true, then I need to question those who lied to me. I need to know if my father was involved. Jeremiah was right about one thing. I didn't ask my father to try to find him. I was so angry and hurt." "Abby, you can't blame yourself," began Thomas. "Of course I can. I didn't believe him when he came back either. So who else can I blame? You, Thomas? You didn't try to find him either, did you?" "You're right. I didn't try. I had been gone so long that I didn't know if Jeremiah was capable of doing such things or not. So instead, I was trying to comfort and protect you." Abby turned and stared at the lawyer. "Did my father know, Mr. Horace?" "What? Did you and my father know that Jeremiah was in a Denver prison?" "Yes," Horace sighed. "We found out he was there. And you never told me." "What was the use of it, Mrs. Hawthorne? The Mendices had already talked to you and left. The warrant for his arrest had already been postponed. And frankly, ma'am, you were already sharing a bed with Thomas. What good did it do us to tell you that?" I don't know," Abby stammered as tears began to stream down her face. "Maybe it would have changed the way I felt about him when he came home." "Please, Mrs. Hawthorne, just because you know this wouldn't have changed the outcome of our confrontation with Jeremiah. Everything has already been done. Now," Horace continued, "we will have to recognize that we have little to offer your ex-husband to convince him to sell Henry a portion of the ranch. Now we're going to have to convince him to join us, to make him a partner." "Good luck with that," Thomas grumbled. "He sure hates us now. He thinks we sent the Swede to kill him." "Yes," Horace sighed. "I wish the Swede hadn't. I don't know what he was thinking." All three stood looking at each other in silence. Next chapter. Ambrose's group arrived at the View Hotel just before sunset. The sensible protective clothing necessary for hunting or fishing had disappeared from them. In its place were outfits that suggested Ambrose, Samantha, and even Jacob belonged to Denver's high society. Sarah, Desiree, and Monique were dressed in the usual dresses of the time and looked like young ladies, which they were. Samantha entered the house under the arm of Jeremiah, who was still dressed in his usual attire but clean. Samantha's transformation, however, was remarkable. The effeminate, shy tomboy had been replaced by an attractive, slender woman who wasn't afraid to look anyone in the eye. She wore a stylish Victorian dress that emphasized her small advantages. Although Desiree and Abby could be described as more naturally beautiful, Samantha's presence demanded everyone's attention. "My goodness, Miss Jenkins," exclaimed Zeb. "Well, aren't you a beauty? I haven't seen you so dressed up since Miss Augusta Tabor's big party a couple of years ago." "It's been a long time, kind sir," Sam smiled and curtsied. "I haven't worn it since that night. It's been tucked away in the closet, but today is a special occasion." "Ah, yes, you are returning to Leadville, and Jeremiah will follow shortly." "Yes, but we will only be in Leadville until the wedding. Then we'll leave for Denver." "Well, I shall. So this is a real goodbye night, then?" Sam nodded. "Then I thought I'd add one more thing to it. After Jeremiah leaves, I'm taking Desiree and Lil Mo with me to Louisiana." "Really? I thought you were going to Aspen," Ambrose interjected. "No, I've been doing this too long," Zeb sighed. "This isn't the life I hope to give Desiree, and certainly not the kind I want for Lil Mo. Now come on in and sit down. This may be the last time the lobby of this hotel is filled with people and food. Widow Brown has outdone herself and made fried chicken with lots of stuff." "She sure is special," Jeremiah grinned. "Maybe she'd like Louisiana?" Desiree burst into laughter, and Zeb smiled widely. "Well," he said slowly, "I kind of already asked her. She's coming with us." "Along with Robbie," Desiree laughed. "Yeah," Zeb moaned, "and all those damn dogs. We'll look like damned settlers going the wrong way, east to Louisiana instead of west." Ambrose's company laughed and congratulated him. Soon everyone was seated. The tension that hung over the assembled people hardly interfered with their enjoyment of the fine food. Serious discussion of the purpose of the Hawthorns' visit was postponed, and the conversation turned to mining, the weather, and Denver. When finished, Ambrose got out 2 bottles of excellent port wine. After everyone had been served, he cleared his throat. "I suppose we should get to the point of this little meeting," he began. "First of all, we never got to finish getting to know each other. Jeremiah and Sarah have already let us know who you are, but I must introduce myself. My name is Ambrose Whitebreck. Perhaps you've heard of my brother, Robert Whitebreck? He was treasurer of the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad when they had that little incident with Bat Masterson. Mrs. Hawthorne, I'm sure there are doubts about the veracity of the information Jeremiah shared with you yesterday. The Pinkertons I hired were very thorough. I know that the evidence in question has been notarized and is kept in a safe deposit box in Denver." "Mr. Whitebreck," Horace interrupted, his voice betraying his concern. "I hope you're not implying that—" "I'm not implying anything, Mr. Horace. I'm simply saying that we have notarized depositions from Pedro and Maria Mendez regarding the false accusations related to Jeremiah's warrant and his alleged indiscretion. Their testimony makes it clear that they were threatened and coerced into giving false testimony against Jeremiah. They stated that it was Swede who threatened them, and that it was he who shot, or should I say wounded, Mr. Mendez in the arm. Mr. Horace, you and I both know that the border courts are very suspicious. Justice here is administered from a bag of coins or the muzzle of a gun, just as it is in our legal system. These depositions were taken to expose the lies surrounding Jeremiah. As to whether they are related to your current employer, that is for everyone to decide for themselves. Be that as it may, there is no warrant out for Jeremiah's arrest, and all charges against him can be proven. So, Jeremiah has told us everything you asked him to. Unfortunately, I must inform you that Jeremiah cannot give you what you want, even if he were so inclined." "And he's not inclined," interjected Sam, much to the amusement of those at the table. I'm sorry, she said embarrassed, as Jeremiah reached out and took her hand. His loving smile was unmistakable. Never apologize for protecting your man, my dear, Ambrose grinned. You see, Ambrose continued, addressing everyone, he can't give you what you want because he no longer owns the business or any of its holdings. What? Exclaimed Thomas and Horace amicably. That's right, Jeremiah said, grinning. I sold the livery to my father's partner and paid back what was left of the loan. Then I sold my share of the ranch as well. It no longer brought back anything but unpleasant memories for me. So when a pretty girl accepted my marriage proposal, I sold it. Everything is already signed and agreed and will start the day after our wedding. The deal I made secured me a position in a bank in Denver. It gives me a small stake in that bank, and I will be working and learning the financial business under the guidance of a mentor. I'm sure this will sound boring to you all, but through this, I will be able to provide a future for my wife and children. But why? Abby asked quietly, looking intently at Jeremiah. Why didn't you say something sooner? Why would I? Growled Jeremiah. You all ambushed me. Again. And then you tell me how sorry you are and try to bribe me with my own daughter. Why should I trust any of you? I wasn't sure how far you'd go to get your way, now that you'd brought the Swede. I realized I was in danger, but better me than my friends and family. I knew that Zeb would protect Desiree and Lil Mo. I also assumed you didn't know about Ambrose and Sam. I was sure you didn't know about Sarah either. The simple truth is that I will die before I let anyone hurt my girls. Sam put her arm around his shoulders and glared at him. I met with Zeb last night and told him that if anything was going to happen, it would involve the Swede. Turns out I was right. Zeb followed him and saw him get his rifle out of the wagon and start walking toward Taylor's Pass. When he tried to ambush me, Zeb took him down like the dog he was. Now I can focus on my future. I was happy on the ranch. I had a wife and daughter that I loved, but one of them was taken from me and the other broke my heart. Very kind people gave me my daughter back, and an angel healed my heart. I look forward every night to holding that angel in my arms. Did someone bring Sarah back to you? Asked Abby. Jeremiah nodded and looked at Ambrose. When I ran away, I must have had angels watching over me, Sarah interjected. I didn't know where to go at first. I heard you say Daddy had gone to Denver before he came back that day, so I went to Colorado Springs first. I was fortunate enough to hitch a ride with a family that was going to Denver. When I got to Denver, I started asking questions at the city jail. Then I went to one of the churches. The Reverend and his wife took me in for a few days and then introduced me to Mr. Ambrose. Mr. Ambrose took me to Leadville to introduce me to Sam. She took me in. They told everyone I was her new maid. Why? Asked Abby. Actually, it was at my suggestion, Ambrose explained. You see, at the time, I wasn't quite ready. Ready for what? Asked Mr. Horace. Well, to tell you the truth, I wasn't ready for this visit. I needed to make sure your man couldn't track Sarah to Jeremiah too quickly. There were still a few loose ends that needed my attention. Fortunately, they were resolved long before your man left for Ashcroft. We were able to transport Sarah here only a few days after she was discovered in Leadville. I have another little confession to make, Ambrose grinned. I did not return Sarah to her father with the most honorable of intentions. I knew Jeremiah was an honest man, and that my gift would influence his decision to sell. Jeremiah did not say he sold his share to me and my partners. It is also my group's bank, and I will be the one working with Jeremiah. He's great with numbers and should do well. And the fact that he and his bride-to-be are interested in the bank is an added bonus. I didn't buy Jeremiah out just as a favor to John Jenkins. I agree with Henry Thompson. Besides taking care of my good friend's daughter, whom I love like my own, it's also a very profitable investment. Those placers they've already found around Pikes Peak may have already been all dug up, but there's a very good chance that all that gold must have come from somewhere. It's quite likely that sooner or later someone will discover where from, and then this little valley will become extremely valuable. With a controlling interest in the Hawthorne Ranch, I could gain a foothold in the valley. But Mr. Whitebreck, said Horace cautiously, Henry Thompson owns most of this valley. That is very true, Mr. Horace. However, I bought Jeremiah's share not only because it might be a good investment, but also to get a little revenge. You see, sir, my wife's cousin, Ambrose's voice became low and threatening, lives in Kansas City. We're not particularly close to that side of the family, so my wife and I only found out about it a few years ago. This cousin has a daughter who married a handsome young man. A few years ago, she traveled with him to Colorado to help his grandfather run a ranch. They were unlucky. They arrived just in the middle of the Railroad War. As you know, there was a lot of nasty underground business going on at that time. Yet, never in their worst nightmares did they think they would run into people who would try to chase Grandpa off his land. Not just chase him off, but burn him out. They were threatened and then terrorized by a big blonde male bear. My husband still has burns on his hands from trying to rescue his grandfather from a burning house. His last name is Wilson. Horace looked very uncomfortable. You can imagine my surprise when I spoke to this man who made an impression on a good friend of mine. This man had won the heart of my friend's daughter, and his tales of the past were eerily familiar. I even learned that there was a man working for Thompson who looked like the son of a bitch who had done this to my wife's relatives. Well, that got me really curious. I was even more surprised when I learned that the same man had been buying up land and businesses in the area. It was a blessing from heaven when I found out that he had greatly exceeded his line of credit. It was like manifest destiny. It took me a little while, but eventually I bought out all of his debts. It was the loose ends that needed to be addressed. I figured I'd take almost everything he had except the ranch when I got all his markers at the end of the month. Oh, hellfire. I won't even be surprised if there isn't an occasional fire or two on the ranch before winter. Ambrose's grin sent shivers running down everyone's spine. By law or at gunpoint, Mr. Horace, please tell your employer that everyone associated with him is in danger when all this happens. Besides, sir, Denver is not the safest city, even for lawyers. There was silence around the table as everyone pondered Ambrose's thinly veiled threat. Now that this unpleasant business is over with, Ambrose continued, paying almost no attention to the party at Hawthorne. Would anyone care to smoke a cigar with Jacob and me? Hell yeah, declared Zeb, entering the kitchen. Right after I help clean up the place. Come on, Pappy, Desiree laughed. Sarah and I will help get everything done. Zeb grinned from ear to ear. Jeremiah? Asked Ambrose. Please excuse Jeremiah, Sam interjected. He needs to spend some time with his fiancée. Jeremiah, would you mind escorting me outside for a little walk? I'd be honored. The couple stood up and walked outside hand in hand. The guests left the table in silence and dispersed into small groups. Horace and Thomas headed upstairs to their rooms, while Abby lingered downstairs for a few minutes before slipping out the back door. She needed to talk to Jeremiah and apologize. She also knew that Sam wouldn't be happy about this interruption. Still, this might be her last chance to talk to her ex-husband. As she approached them, she heard their voices. I'm sorry, Jeremiah. I didn't mean to bother you like that. Shh, sweetheart. You're not a nuisance. It's just that I'm scared. I know what they say about me behind my back. That a man would only marry a harpy like me for my money. They say I'm a spoiled little princess who probably drove her husband to his grave. But you know that's not true, don't you? Jeremiah chuckled and smiled. Yes, I know it's not true. However, about the corruption. Okay, there might be some truth to that. Sam suppressed a small chuckle. But I'm getting better. It's just that I was so angry with James, who left me in Leadville and spent a year in the mountains working at one of my father's mines. We hadn't even been married 2 years and he was already gone. He didn't even give me the baby he promised. When I was told he died of pneumonia, I crumbled. I know a lot of people thought I was crazy, but it was just the pain. It was the realization that the beautiful life I had planned for us had died. All I was left with was the grim hopelessness of becoming a widow before I even turned 20. After that, I looked at every man who sought my hand with those dead eyes. I did this for 4 years and probably did become the harpy they say I am. I know I went to Mrs. Tabor's big party kicking and screaming. I'm glad Daddy demanded that I be there. Only later did I find out that he wanted me to meet a man he respected very much. It was you, Jeremiah Hawthorne, and when I first met you, I was ashamed. Ashamed? She nodded and smiled mischievously at him. I wanted you to like me so much that it scared me. I haven't had that feeling since James. When you wrapped me in your arms the first time we danced, I almost cried. It was the first time I let myself hope that I would be happy again. But then I started looking at myself from the outside and the kind of person I had become. I swore to God that if you gave me a chance, I would become the kind of woman you would be proud to marry. Samantha, I was always proud to be with you, even when you dressed like a man. Sam laughed and playfully slapped his arm. It's been an honor to be around you, Jeremiah said grimly. Sam, I love you. Even when I act like a spoiled child sometimes, even when I let my temper take over, I love you no matter what, Samantha Jenkins Wilcox. You tell me about how I changed your life, but you changed my life even more. You know how broken I was when you met me. What they did to me just killed me. I know, sweetheart. That's why I'm so angry with them. How could you do that to someone you say you love? I'm sorry if I let my claws out a little. Jeremiah laughed softly. No one can say they don't know how you feel. Jeremiah, I'm sorry. I'm trying very hard. Hush, beautiful. It's all right. It's nice when someone loves you enough to fight for you. Jeremiah's words sank deeply into Abby's heart. She tried, but couldn't quite suppress the sobs. Who's there? Barked Sam. I'm sorry. What do you want? Sam was clearly starting to get upset until Jeremiah wrapped his arms around her and spoke softly. It's okay, sweetheart, he said softly. Let her say what she needs to say. She can't hurt us. Abby watched Sam melt into his arms. Her body seemed to relax, and Abby thought she even heard a quiet sigh. Abby fought the memory of how safe she had once felt in that embrace. I just wanted to apologize to both of you. Samantha, I'm sorry that Jeremiah's life was jeopardized because of our visit. It was not part of my plans, and I will ask Daddy about it when I get home. I'll also ask him about the Mendices and about Old Man Wilson. I just can't believe Daddy's behind all this. But I promise you, Jeremiah, I will. I just can't believe Daddy is as evil as you think he is. Maybe he's not evil, Jeremiah snorted. Maybe he's just a damn carpetbagger. Feeds on the misfortune of others. Either way, I'm sure he'll regret what he's done someday. Whether you believe it or not, nothing's going to change, Abigail, but it could cost you dearly when his chickens come home. Do you really think that Ambrose? Surely he wouldn't. Yes, I believe he would do exactly what he said he would. Ambrose is a good man, but he has a dark side. If Swede had anything to do with what happened to Old Man Wilson and Ambrose's relatives, I have no doubt that Ambrose will do what he said he would. Abby, I don't hate you anymore, so I hope you don't get hurt. But I won't shed a tear if something bad happens to your father or Thomas. I know you don't want to believe it, but they took away all the good things in my life. Thomas took my wife and daughter from me, and King Henry tried to take the ranch away from my family. I hope they both meet the Swede in hell. I guess I can understand that. But for the way I treated you, and for betraying you with Thomas, I am truly sorry. I know it doesn't mean much now, but I doubt we'll ever see each other again, and I just wanted you to know. I hope you'll ask Sarah to come visit me someday. I don't think so. As long as Thomas and your father are around, I doubt she'll ever come. She nodded and brushed away a tear. Goodbye, Jeremiah. She turned and walked back to the inn, knowing that she was in for some long, hard conversations with her father in the future. She also suspected that she would likely never see her ex-husband again. Next chapter. St. Louis, Missouri, spring 1905. Abigail Hawthorne walked slowly into the cottage. It had been a long winter, but spring brought hope. She prayed it would bring new life to her as well. It had been 19 years since they had moved to St. Louis. After they returned from Ashcroft, she talked to her father. He told her that he had secretly given the Swede a share of the expected profits. Henry said that the Swede had acted on his own accord when he had threatened the Mendez and when he had tried to kill Jeremiah. He swore to her that he hadn't initiated those actions, but admitted that he'd taken advantage of them after they'd occurred. Abby wasn't entirely convinced of this, but shortly after their conversation, several events occurred that limited her options. First, Edmund Horace had returned to Denver. A week later, he left town. No one knew where he had gone except for his last statement, east, where things were more civilized. Thomas then gave up and sold the rest of the ranch to Ambrose. Thomas then left to take up prospecting in the west again. Abby watched his departure with dismay, realizing that after the ranch was sold and everyone was gone, her father was all she had left. She found out about Thomas a few years later when she received a telegraph letter from him. The telegram was from San Francisco, saying they had found gold in the Klondike and he was sailing for Alaska. She never heard from him again. Ambrose Whitebreck turned out to be a man of his word. It took a little longer than expected, but by the spring of 1886, her father had sold off almost everything to cover his debts. He managed to sell the ranch at a small profit, although one of the barns burned to the ground just before Christmas. It was enough to buy a small cottage and a small store. Henry Thompson left Colorado a very embittered man. He became even more depressed and discouraged in 1891 when major gold mining began in the Cripple Creek and Victor areas. To serve these areas, the railroad built a branch line that ran through their old valley. Ambrose Whitebreck and his investors became even richer. The long years that passed were difficult at times. Abby and Henry worked at the store until Henry became too ill. In the last year, she sold it to take care of him. In December, he died, and now she was alone. She was lonely, but partly by choice. She had had several suitors over the years, but she had never considered leaving her father. The suitors she liked the most were the same ones her father disliked the most. Now that she was in her 50s, she was alone. She walked over to her bed and sat down. The silence in the cottage was almost overwhelming. She reached for a small, ornate jewelry box that stood next to the bed. Opening it, she pulled out two items very dear to her: a letter and a telegraph. The first was a letter she had received from Sarah 4 years ago. The second was the telegram she had received the day before. It was a reply to a telegram sent a month earlier. She slowly unfolded the letter and began to read the words she already knew by heart. Dear Mother, I am writing to you to fulfill a promise I made to a very dear man. He thought it would be good for me and those I love to write down my thoughts and feelings and send them to you. He said that whether you receive this letter or not, it would be good for me to write and say whatever needs to be said. I won't tell you that I welcomed his request. I think he knows what he is talking about, for he is a doctor. I also know that he loves me deeply and cares only for me. In truth, I would do almost anything for Dr. Harold Thornton, my husband. I think I should get to the point. Mom, I forgive you. I forgive you for not believing me and not defending me afterwards. I won't say I fully understand why you did that, but if it makes you feel better, I forgive you. I hope you understand why I ran away. After I told you what Uncle Thomas did, none of you believed me. It was like what happened to Daddy. Nobody believed him either. I felt unprotected, so I needed to find someone to take care of me. It was a miracle that I found Dad so quickly. It was an even bigger miracle that I found Harold a few years after Daddy and Sam were married. A few months ago, I got a letter from Desiree. It was the woman with the little girl you met at the Jenkins near Ashcroft. She wrote that she and everyone were doing well and that she had remarried. Little Mo is growing up to be a real beauty, and her daddy is already threatening to skin some of the local boys if they get too persistent. Zeb and Widow Brown are still unmarried, but they are always together and will be for the rest of their lives. It was Desiree's letter that gave Harold the idea of writing to you. As I said, I am now married to a doctor. You have 2 grandchildren, a boy, John Ambrose, and a girl, Samantha Desiree. We moved here to Santa Fe about 10 years ago with Dad, Sam, and my half-sisters. Dad is the president of one of the banks in Ambrose. He and Sam have 3 cute blonde-haired devils. Of course, that's not entirely true. All three of my stepsisters are pretty cute for the most part, but they've all gotten Sam's personality. It's funny watching them around Daddy. Each one of them thinks she's got him wrapped around her finger. It's even funnier when Sam shoos them away, sits on Daddy's lap, and lets them know that Daddy is hers and will always be hers. I swear I laugh every time I see all three girls stick out their bottom lips and pout. I once asked Daddy if he ever gets tired of the constant turmoil of having four girls in the house. He just smiled, hugged me, and said that he missed spending 5 years with me, so this is just heaven. He also said he couldn't ask for more. He had a wife who loved him as much as he loved her, 4 wonderful daughters, a grandson and granddaughter who are hanging on the moon. We have nice homes, food on the table, and good health. We even have a doctor in the family. He says we are very blessed. I can't argue with that. Before I go, I must let you know that you are welcome to come and visit us. I can't say that Grandpa or Uncle Thomas would be pleased, but you are. Even Sam said she'd be on her best behavior if you came. She's changed a lot over the years. She's much happier now. She says it's because of Daddy, and while I'm sure that's true, she loves her 3 girls very much. It is time for me to end this letter. I have fulfilled my husband's wish by writing this letter, and I think I will be working on his other wish soon. Harold is hinting that we will have another baby. If you ever decide to come, just telegraph your arrival date and we will pick you up at the train station. Best wishes from your daughter, Sarah. Abby wiped away her tears, folded the tattered letter again, and put it back in the box. Slowly, she unfolded the telegram. She would wait until Henry had passed away and the cottage had been tended before answering it. She contacted Sarah and asked if the offer to come and visit was still on. The day before, Sarah replied, I look forward to meeting you. We will definitely get together. The grandchildren are thrilled. Abby didn't know how things would work out, but she knew she had to try. Even if she only got to see her grandchildren once, it would be worth it. She bought a train ticket to Santa Fe and telegraphed her arrival time within a day of hearing back from Sarah. It was spring, a time of new beginnings,